I did a video not too long, well, yesterday, and I had all the technical glitches you could possibly have. They all
Is that
happened.
right,
My
eh?
camera was flickering. I forgot to turn on my microphone. People in the comments were like, because it was about investing, I was like trying to figure out what to invest in, and the first comment was like, invest in more than your Fisher Price
Forecast.
setup. Yeah. So I got ripped apart, but nice to see you. So I
Thank you.
actually did a recap of the last video we did, which was 3 months ago. And well, we recorded it more than that, but I posted it 3 months ago. And the for something that's relatively not overly exciting, the amount of visibility it got and the amount of people that reached out, I think it was amazing. I think your daughter watched it. I
Yeah.
even had I even had your dad reach out to me saying, "Oh, thanks for the video." I was like, "This is incredible." So that was pretty cool. I wanted to kind of maybe just find out from your end how it was received.
My fans, what can I say? No, it was good. Yeah, I was surprised by the view counts, but I haven't done a lot of this sort of YouTube interview, so I don't really know what to expect in this world. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't think any of us know what to expect.
yeah,
I
exactly.
mean,
You know what
yeah,
I like?
some
If we can get people engaged in the conversation, there's condo is complex, and so I love that. Like, I love the conversation with you because you're looking at it from a different perspective from me, and so together we have something kind of interesting going on. So,
yeah, so you know what? Let's get this thing kicked off. And here's, I guess,
okay.
the one thing I want to start with, and it's something that you mentioned last time that I never even thought about. You mentioned it again, and I'm like, you know what? This is actually pretty big. So I kind of want to talk about net zero mandates and the perspective I'm looking at it from is again, I'll go back to cars quickly just to give people an idea of what I'm talking about. Over the last 10 to 15 years, emissions have been a big thing with cars, right?
Mhm.
Less emissions, understandable. What that has done over the last 10 years, it has made cars extremely difficult to work on. So it's overcomplicated everything. And ultimately now, once you get an expensive repair, it's so expensive that a car can ultimately be deemed totaled because the sum of the components and fixing it and the specialized labor and everything is just not worth fixing. So I want to open
It's a
up
little
this
bit like the
Pandora.
furnace in my house. I spent so much money extra to get this furnace because it was going to save me money, and then the motherboard goes and it cost me $3,000 to change it.
Yeah, so there you go. So that's what I want to talk
Yeah.
about, like from your perspective, because one key thing you said last time is when I asked you about quality, and you said it's not so much about lack of quality, it's about the complexity of
Mhm.
what we're building and how we're building. And I thought that was a really interesting point. And I figured this net zero mandate is probably a good place to start. I just wanted to kind of hear from you, high level, your thoughts on net zero and I guess what kind of retrofits or what are the challenges that they're going to be faced for existing structures and stuff that's actually being built?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll try and keep myself out of hot water in that topic, but we'll
Well,
see
we
how
can
it
always
goes.
edit things.
I'm a big fan of being honest. I say it the way I see it kind of thing because I think it's about balance. We've got to sort it out.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, so yeah, like, can you just maybe just explain net zero in terms of
Jump into
condos, how it,
that? Sure.
yeah.
Let's do it. So, I mean, the government originally started with these carbon taxes, right? And then they rolled back the kind of consumer carbon tax. They kept some in on the big emitters. And I mean, I understand the basis of carbon taxes, right? Let's make gas more expensive so that it becomes more cost effective to shift over to electricity. But obviously, all of this net zero is basically let's get the gas out of things. So same as your car, let's get to an electric car. Same on the building front, let's get to an electric building. And that sounds simple, except that the technology is difficult, right? And I think we have to balance, like we want to save the planet, but we need to make sure that we're in the course of doing that, we're not preventing young people from ever being able to afford a home. So how do I balance those two things? Okay, so that's the sort of background. Let's dig in a little bit. So that there was the carbon taxes, they got rolled back on the gas, they still kind of exist. They probably will come back, who knows? And there's mandates, right? So the federal government has said by 2050, let's aim for net zero. The city of Toronto has got some big mandates to try and decarbonize buildings, and they may start instituting fines. So they're collecting data through the EWRB, the Energy and Water Reporting Benchmarking, something like that, initiative. They may start to say if you're producing too much carbon in a year, then we're going to fine you, which they have done in other jurisdictions. Um,
Wow.
and so that may start to be a cost. And at first, that cost is likely to be a penalty that gets paid until it gets big enough that it's worth investing in the change to the equipment. And so there's going to be pressure on condos to decarbonize. So what does that actually look like? If I have a building that has gas boilers, which most of them do, gas-fired makeup air unit, I need to target those gas-fired domestic water boilers as well as heating. I need to target how do I remove those gas-fired boilers? And so the right answer on most of the equipment is electric heat pumps, right? So an air source electric heat pump, let's say, up on the roof to replace the boilers. Okay, so that's an interesting challenge. It's expensive equipment, it's heavier equipment, so we've got to make sure the building can take it. It's bigger, so we need space for it. So there's some logistical challenges, there's some technical challenges, but then there's also the fact that when it gets too cold outside, that heat pump can't serve, right? So its ability to provide heat declines as the temperature drops until some point where it has to be cut off and you have to switch over to a gas boiler. And it feels like that gas boiler should be little because it's just being used once in a while, but it's being used on the coldest days of the year. And so it
Mm.
needs to be the big capacity. So you end up owning the air source heat pump and the backup gas boiler. Now, in theory, in a perfect world, that backup gas boiler might last a very long time because it's just used a few days a year. But in practice, it's like a car. If you only ran it 2 days a year, you're probably going to spend a lot of money on maintenance, right? So it doesn't actually just last longer because of that. And so I think what's going to happen as we decarbonize the buildings is we're going to put a lot more equipment into the buildings. And so now let's step back and look at that from a reserve fund perspective. So I'm now a condo owner and I'm on the board and we need to plan this. So what's the first step? First step is decarbonization plan. Like get a roadmap done for the building that says, looking in light of the age of our equipment and when we're planning to renew it already, when are the appropriate times to make that gas to electric conversion and how, with what equipment. So come up with a plan that says, here's what we would do. Then there's going to be some incremental cost. So the like for like replacement with the boilers is going to cost X and the heat pump option is going to be X plus Y, right?
Yeah.
How do I get the money for that additional cost? And so then, some people sort of say, oh, we'll just, plan for it in the reserve fund. I'm not convinced yet that the legislation allows us to do that because the Condo Act says, we're to do the repair and replacement of the common elements and assets of the corporation. So the thing has to exist for me to budget it. I can't budget for things that don't exist yet, right?
Okay, and how do you, sorry, and just to pause on that. So
Yeah.
just so I understand, it's currently there's a mandate, but just so I understand, does the mandate mean condos right now need to be looking at it and there will be a penalty in the end, or is it voluntary?
Yeah, at
Like,
this point, it's still voluntary. I
okay,
expect
so
that
I
will
see.
change, right?
So
Because
nobody,
yeah.
sorry, go on.
Well, the big government has said Canada's doing this
I see.
federally. The provinces are doing whatever dance they're doing. The municipalities are actually driving it more,
I see.
right? So they're
So
setting it. And so there's going to be mandates coming down the pipe. They're not here yet.
okay, so ultimately, this is like the cloud, so to speak, and from my eyes, this is the cloud that's overhanging.
Hmm.
And ultimately, if it's mandate to to the degree that you're saying right now, where you're ultimately running two systems at the same time, or you have to basically account for running two systems at the same time, that's the massive cost and risk. But as of right now, it's just kind of like a nice to do. But is anybody like actually doing anything about it right now in terms of condo boards, or is everybody just like, yeah, this is a point here, we're looking at it, but we don't have to do anything right now?
There are a few proactive condos doing a decarbonization roadmap, and mostly because there's some funding available for that. So there's
Oh,
some
okay.
it's called deep retrofit accelerator programs. So through the
Okay.
Toronto Atmospheric Fund or through Purpose, another engineering firm, they have access to some money to help offset the cost of the studies.
Okay,
And
I
so
see.
some folks are taking advantage of that to kind of get a plan because they're saying, well, like, what do we plan? Like, so let's say I need an extra $1 million of equipment over the next 20 years or 30 years to decarbonize. How am I going to get that money? And right now, a condo could just decide I'm just going to borrow it when the time comes. That's fine. I may special assess when the time comes, or I may decide to set up a contingency fund. And so each condo is going to make its own decision in that regard. But I do think we have to we have to make sure that we balance it because, the cost of a home is already out of reach for many young people, and this is going to add more cost. And so it's towards helping the planet, which is an honorable goal. But at the same time, we are residents of the planet and our homes are where we live. And so we have to balance that. I think we can't be too throw out the baby with the bathwater on this. I think, if I were looking at the top of the world and saying where is the best place to deploy money to help the planet, I'm not certain that driving up the cost of condos is the place that I would start. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how about some measures to reduce these big forest fires that are happening? How about, some I'm not running the world, fortunately, so that's good. But I just feel like it's not the best place to start under the circumstances, right? Like we have
Right.
we have managed to drive the price of condos up so high and the cost of repairing them is now so high that they're becoming out of reach for so many people that to add on another layer of cost is really kind of soul destroying. And a lot of times too, we're doing that. Imagine I'm going to electrify this building, which means I need more. I'm going to try and do the design to stay within the electricity that's available there. I have a chiller that's using power. I can now use that for my heat pump or whatever. But a lot of times we're going to need extra electricity to the building too, right? And those kinds of upgrades are very expensive. But meanwhile, at the same time, we're saying, hey, how about electric vehicles? How am I going to get a building in place that everybody can charge their electric vehicle at home? And that one, I'm afraid I kind of keep saying, if I were on a condo board, I would keep kicking that down the road as long as I could, because I have to believe that it doesn't make sense if we do get to a world where everybody's in electric vehicles. I don't think it makes sense to charge all of them at home. Like, I think we have to have fast charging out of the buildings
Right.
in order to
I
do that charging because it's just too, like, how can I get that much power? Why would I get that much power to every building instead of having centralized electricity stations where you stop and get power on your way to work like we do now
yeah.
with gas, right? So,
I remember when Kathleen Wynne was in power. I think she's the one that mandated that all new condo construction had to have or had to be uh I guess not hardwired, but it had to be retrofitted for if you wanted
roughed
an
in,
EV. Yeah,
yeah.
it had to be roughed in. That's right. But I don't know what happened with that because I know a couple of buildings like 2020 Bathurst, 55 Mercer. There's a bunch of them that came out with that, and I saw the chargers down there, or at least the plugs were there. But I don't know if is that still a thing with
Do you
brand
know
new
what?
builds?
I can't answer that. That's a Toronto Green Standard thing, and I'm not close
I
enough
see.
to know. I don't do a lot of new construction. I do performance audits, but not the
Yeah.
design side. So,
Yeah, it's always interesting with these EVs because like in California, they keep pushing like, okay, EV, but it's like whoever did the math, they're like, if everybody went EV, we don't have enough power to actually charge all the cars. So how does that work, right? But I guess that whoever comes up with the policies doesn't really care about that.
well, and there's going to be some smart guys. One of the electricians in the industry always reminds me, that's Mark Marmer. He always reminds me, Sally, when all of the cars are electric, that's a huge battery sitting in the building that we might be able to put power in and take power out of for the building too, right? So there may be some creative solutions that come about where there's some upside to it. But
Yeah,
I
that's
actually have
actually, yeah.
some other, like I am not a huge EV fan in high-rise buildings, mostly because I don't know that, I think that the codes are not
If you're enjoying this interview with Sally, then do me a favor, like the video. And if you want to get the best market stats in the city of Toronto, and I promise you, they're pretty good, subscribe to the channel. On the 5th of every month, I post a video once the TREB stats are out and I break it down super simple, no nonsense. Subscribe and now enjoy the rest of this interview.
keeping up with the fire risk related to
I
the
see.
and so they make
Interesting.
me anxious. It's funny, I'm on some committees where we said, let's explore this because I've seen a few situations where I'm just really anxious about fire in certain buildings. I'll tell you why in a minute. And when we go out to some members of the committee have gone out to some of the local fire marshals and said, what's your thoughts about electric vehicle fires in high-rise buildings? And the answer comes back, oh, most owners are putting them outside or they're putting them on the ground floor. And it's like, hold on, not in condo. In condo, we have to put them where the person lives. We can't put it outside. We can't put it on P1. It's where they live. And so you have these EVs in, and most condos, when they go to retrofit, often they're retrofitting the cars in a certain zone if they have the flexibility to do that too. So I don't know. I think there's a big fire risk. Like when these cars go on fire, which is not common, it's less common probably than gas cars. But when they get on fire, they're very, very hard to firefight. They off
Mm,
gas gases, so the guys have to be wearing the full scuba gear. They can't actually put the fire out. All they can do is cool the battery and to try and stop it from running away, like from it transferring from cell to cell. So they're just cooling, 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 cooling. My understanding is like an Olympic swimming pool or two worth of water and
Wow.
then they drag it out of the building and they leave it in a field because they figure it'll probably catch on fire in the next couple of days anyways. So that's the firefighting. And meanwhile, we haven't changed the sprinklers that are in the parking garages, to reflect that yet. I think the NFPA, the fire protection folks, are changing that. They haven't yet. And the methods are hard, right? Like the methods for the guys working on the fire is really difficult. And so I am feeling anxious about a world where if one catches fire in the night and it catches its two neighbors on fire, that's a lot of heat I'm not sure that we're going to be able to fight those fires adequately. Now it's
Yeah.
going to be a smoky, nasty fire, so the building's probably going to be empty, but I don't it'll get emptied out by the alarm, but it's still a really risky situation. And there's what's really giving me alarm is these new buildings with the automated parking systems. So there's some, these steel pallets where you park your car on a pallet and then the pallet gets moved to its parking
Oh, yeah, yeah.
spot.
Okay. I've seen that. There's a couple downtown I know of like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and if
They're
one of
usually
those
boutique,
catches
but
fire, then I don't
yeah,
know how they're going to fight that because they can't even get to them. It's up in the air or it's down in the pit. It's very
right.
difficult to get to.
So from what I know for EVs, and just this is just on the
Yeah,
topic of fires, I know usually, from my understanding, is that usually the fires are caused by the NEMA plugs. So if you use these cheap plugs, so ultimately, if you use, so what a Tesla charger, you can get a plug-in charger, or you can get a hardwired charger. So when I was trying to understand which one I want, this is where everybody was saying the fire risk is the one where you plug them in, whereas the ones that are hardwired, at least from my understanding, there's no failure rate with those. It's the plug-in ones where maybe it can overheat the plug and that's where things start. But yeah,
yeah,
and
but if the
then
batteries themselves though start to go, right? If you get
but
an
that's
overheating cell,
that's
that's
the
what
point.
they can't deal with.
Yeah, but that's why I think yeah, I understand. I think just the
Yeah.
risk is the plug and the battery is the catalyst to the bad things happening.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So it's interesting. But anyways, but it all kind of fits together, right? I have this huge power demand. The irony is that I have a building currently where Hydro has given them notice that says we're coming in to take out your transformer that feeds your building that's got PCBs in it because the old PCB transformers are getting removed and we're
sorry, what is
downsizing it.
PCB?
It's
PCB?
so it's a hazardous material. It's an oil that was used in the old transformers for
Okay.
cooling, and it was great for cooling, but it's hazardous, so we're getting rid of those ones. And but meanwhile, they're downsizing the transformer that's going into the building. Like you have
Uh,
3,000 kVA, we're going to drop you down to 2,200 because that's all you're using. And I'm thinking, but we're going to have to decarbonize in 10 years. So what the heck are you doing downsizing it, right? So
yeah, that's extra work for them. They're gonna make in 10 years some a little extra money.
maybe, I guess, right? I'm just like, oh,
Wow.
it's like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So it's going to be an interesting
Amazing.
ride for the next 20 years on that front, for sure, coming up with the money.
So speaking of interesting rides, I just wanted to touch back on something again with new builds in particular.
Hmm.
Just curious, super tall and highly amenitized buildings, are they again, just do you think they're financially sustainable or are they kind of like future liabilities? Because again, it comes back to not the quality, not the builder, it's whether or not you can basically sustain to fix something that's narrow, skinny, and
Yeah.
complex.
Well,
Like
I will
how
tell you.
confident?
Yeah, we are doing reserve fund studies for some of these big buildings now. And what is striking to me is if I have a 20-story building in a field and I do the math, I'm looking at three this week right now. So 8 stories, 10 stories, 12 stories. The window replacement project, which is coming due in this particular set of sites is or set of buildings is 4 million to 7 million a building kind of thing. So it's a big amount of money that one of them doesn't have enough. It'd be 25,000 a unit, special assessment kind of thing on the big buildings. So I'm trying to think what's one of the ones I've done in the last couple of weeks, maybe 500 plus units, and the cladding would be 30 million,
Oof.
right? So on a per unit basis, not that different, but on a reserve fund study, it looks really ugly. So if I plan for replacement of that window wall system, because it's covered in window wall everywhere, in say 45 or 55 years, I need a massive increase in the reserve contribution today. And then the balance in that fund is going to climb up to about 100 million by the time they do that window project, because when it's out 40 years inflated, that's what it converts to. And people can't get their head around that. They're just like, I am not increasing my contributions today to put $100 million in the bank for 40 years later.
Yeah.
And so they push back really hard, you know, especially a lot of these newer condos, I suspect have a lot of builder influence on the boards as well, still, you know, or a lot heavy investors and probably investors that are underwater. So it's like nobody wants to face reality. But so basically, I'm faced with this group of buildings where they're just saying we can't, like, we just cannot plan for this. Can we just look out the 30 years and ignore it, knowing full well that 15 years from now, when it hits the analysis period, if I do that, the increase is going to be massive to the fees because now I only have 30 years to collect the 25 or 40 million, depending on the building. And so it's very difficult on the boards to fully fund replacement of those systems. And now the pushback is always, okay, so a window wall system, you know, am I going to have to replace it in 50 years, you know, or are they better than they used to be? And now they're going to last 50 years, 100 years, you know, never need to be replaced. And of course, we don't know the answer to that. You know, I know what is happening to the ones that were installed 40 years ago. I don't know how the ones that are installed today are going to perform in 40 years, but I do know that many of them leak within the first few years, right?
Oof.
And so, you know, but we will come up with other methods, I presume, to retrofit. You know, we're going to take out the operables and leave the fixed and paint them and do what we can to buy time on them. But it is a big challenge. Like that's the big project in any of these studies. I think we talked about that last time too, how the
Yep.
windows are the big deal. And in the big ones, the boards just can't stomach it. They just want to run for cover because they cannot see their way to funding the full replacement. So I wanted to try and get some sort of consensus with my peers in industry to say what's reasonable to plan for. Like how much, what percentage of the total replacement cost should we be planning? Because there is no correct answer and we have no real guidance on it. It's just
Yeah.
yeah, we have to come up with it. But the super talls are just tricky. The mobilization's tricky. A lot of them are over laneways where every time you're on the wall, you're going to spend $200,000 of hoarding to protect the base.
Oh my God.
The work
Okay,
is
wow.
tricky. The access to the facades on some of them is just silly. You know, they're
Yeah.
these ones with the staggered balconies.
Oh,
Because
oh
when
yeah.
we drop, when we fix
Yeah.
a building, right, we drop a stage down and that
Yeah.
falls by a gravity. And so with the staggered balconies, we can't get up against the wall anywhere. So you're scaffolding on every other balcony. Like it's just insanity
Wow.
from an access perspective. Yeah. So super tall is complex. And then the other thing is, I mean, it's funny, I was thinking, what's keeping me up these days? What keeps me up at night? And I'm thinking, in the new condos, it's this complexity, it's this and cost sharing. It's the complexity of the cost sharing. So if you want to fix the damn building, you can't even figure out who's responsible for doing it and who's responsible for paying for it because the cost sharing agreements are so complex. So that doesn't make it any easier.
Wow. Yeah, so it sounds like one of those situations. It's kind of like you just kick the can down the road until it's you no longer can, and then you have the big party
Yeah,
at
I
the
mean, you
end.
try and balance it, right? Like on the reserve fund front, we're doing our best to try and get as much as we can into those studies to plan for those. But at the same time, we don't want to, I don't want to be unrealistic. I'm not going to
Yeah.
pretend that every window wall is going to get replaced at year 40. Some are
Yeah.
going to need work at 40, some are going to need replacement at 45, some might last to 75. And I can't tell at day one. So we're going to kind of go in the middle there and hopefully get them to roughly the right place. But they're big fee increases that result. So
So okay, that's yeah. I'm always very the tall ones and the glass ones are always the ones where I'm very, very, very cautious. But I mean, it's almost to me it seems like you're better off avoiding them. But especially look, I have a couple of clients with in some really nice big towers downtown, well known, well built, glass everywhere, 45th floor, beautiful, like beautiful
the
views and
views are
stuff.
amazing.
You're picking up 10 grand in rent. I have one right now coming out soon, and it's like, and then at the same time, it's like they can't keep the heat down in the unit because it's southwest facing, and it's like,
Mm.
and then it's like, well, what do you do? Because it's all glass. Well, okay, you can put blinds, you can do a bunch, but unless you do full blackout, like you kind of can't do anything. And then it's like, okay, well, what do we do? We'll move the thermostat from here to here. I'm like, what's that gonna do? Because they're saying, well, the thermostat is in a cooler place. Anyway, I look at this stuff and I'm like, oh my God, what a mess. Like, how is this getting resolved? I don't know. But
Yeah, the mechanical side of some of these tall buildings seems to be a problem. They have a lot of challenges with domestic water, a lot of challenges with overheating,
yeah,
and
yeah.
um,
It's never ending. Okay. Next thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is one that's actually impacting, I think, the residential freehold space, and I think it's going to
I
trickle
think I
in.
lost your mic, Russ. I can
Okay, can you
hardly
hear
hear
me?
you. Oh, that's
Can,
better. There we go.
okay,
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. So then the next one I wanted to ask you about is the one that's affecting the freehold residential space, and I think it's going to trickle to the condos big time. And so insurance. I don't know if you've seen your insurance renewal in the last, I don't know, in the last year. Mine has gone up 50% this year and it went up another 30% last year. So we're effectively ultimately doubled from what I was paying, call it 2 years ago. So given where things are at right now, and I'm kind of seeing it with insurance, like I guess with condos. I'm noticing in the past deductibles with insurance on the that you're paying through your maintenance fees by the condo, it's like $25,000 the deductible. I've seen some 50,000. Now you're starting to see the deductible at 100,000. And this has a trickle down effect to anything. So I just wanted to see from the insurance side of things, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing?
You know what? I haven't dealt that much with insurance in the last few years. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago in condo, we went through a kind of crisis of huge rate increases. What I'm actually hearing lately is that the year-over-year changes are improving. They were terrible for a while. Condos are a different risk, right, than freehold
I
homes.
think they're lower risk. I think they're lower risk in the
They're
sense
a
that like,
pooled risk. It's just different, right? Like some of these big towers might have 3 or 4 insurers behind them, right? Not a single
oh,
insurer, because any one insurer is not going to pick up more risk in a city block than
I
they're
see.
comfortable with. And some just get out of, like once in a while, condo will get hit hard if a big provider just pulls out of condo, right? I don't like
Right.
insuring condo anymore. I'm out of here. Then we have a big scramble. But it's expensive. One of the interesting things is that the periodic information certificate that goes out to the owners, I forget, I think it's twice a year or something like that. That includes the corporation's insurance deductible. And it does it for a very important reason, and that's because people don't understand the risk, right? Now, unfortunately, the form doesn't say, here's why I'm telling you about this, right? It just tells them. And I do think it's important for people to know because from their own insurance perspective, they can be on the hook for that deductible depending on the terms of their declaration. And so
So
if
it,
they do something, if I forget and leave my bathtub and it overflows and I flood out my neighbors, I can be on the hook for that deductible. And
So
at
can you
100,
just tie that together, the deductible and like the content and like the insurance of
okay,
the
yeah,
person within
okay.
the unit?
I mean, again, I'm engineer, not insurance guy, but I've heard a lot about it, so I'll take you through what I know, which is the condominium corporation buys insurance to cover the common elements and the standard unit. Okay, so the standard unit has a definition in every condo, and it varies. So in some building, it's a bare shell, so just unpainted drywall and concrete. In other buildings, it might include the flooring. In some buildings, it might include the kitchen cabinetry and appliances. And my understanding of the rationale behind the standard unit is that basically the condo is insuring enough to make a gutted unit sellable, right? So there's going to be paint on the drywall, paint on the ceiling, maybe some cabinetry, maybe some appliances, maybe some flooring, but not often. So that's the standard unit that's insured by the condo. And then the unit owner has to insure any improvements that they make and all of their contents, right? So that's the bifurcation. And it would be silly not to have insurance. Like if you can possibly get it, you should have it because if something happens, let's say there's a leak into the building, the condo is going to fix the standard unit, maybe the drywall on the wall, but the floor that got damaged may be yours. And so it needs to be covered by your insurance. So you have to make sure that your insurer knows what the standard unit is to know what's covered by the condo's insurance and then what you have to cover. So then you have these two policies sitting together. But if a lot of, not all, but some declarations will say if the damage stems from your unit, then you're responsible for the corporation's deductible. So imagine your bathtub overflows, you went out to the movies, forgot, left it on. You flooded out 12 stories before they managed to get into your unit and shut the bathtub off. Then the corporation is going to pay to fix all of the common elements and the standard units all the way down, but they can come after you for that deductible. So they can then come back to the unit owner and say, here's your bill for the deductible. It's 100,000, 200,000. So people have no idea that that risk exists for them. Now,
Yeah.
you may be able to get some sort of deductible insurance with your unit owner policy. I remember when we were talking about it years ago when we were working on the amendments to the act, the insurers at that time said, yeah, but you're not getting 100,000 or 200,000. But that's 10 years ago. I don't know what's available now, whether or not you can get coverage for it.
I
But
I just sorry, this story brings some nightmarish. It brings a low-key nightmare I had. I'm not gonna say the year or when. I'm not. It's hypothetical. I'll just
yeah,
tell you a hypothetical situation that may or may not have happened in the city of Toronto. But there was somebody that bought a condo unit, and I may or may not know them. And when they bought this condo unit, somehow they bought it and they didn't purchase insurance despite having a mortgage.
hmm,
So the fault here lies with the more with the bank that gave him the money because they didn't ask for proof of insurance because I guess they figured, well, the condo has insurance, so therefore, what's the worst thing that can happen? The deductible. And I'll just leave it at this. It was a Sunday evening, and for 45 minutes, some just water was gushing. And you can imagine where that went. And then I find out after the fact that there was no insurance, and and then and then you just end up owing a lot of money. So anyway, there's things like
yeah.
this that happen, I guess, all
Well,
the
there
time.
can
But
be
it
some heartbreaks too. If
big
you have
time.
a building that keeps having repeated leaks, you can be in a unit where you've just had your floor replaced, your insurance is paid for it, and you had your floor replaced, and you paid your own deductible on your own policy, and then 3 weeks later, there's another leak that gets you again.
I can tell you in
Right?
this again, not I'm not gonna name
Yeah.
anything. North of the city, there's a community where I think at this point they average about one leak per week. It's
Yikes.
it's it's it's
Yeah.
uh, it's an absolute gong show. So, but anyway, that's just, part of buying a not so good condo. Um, yeah.
I wish there was a
I,
way to know which ones were going to leak though, because sometimes it's, fan coils, sometimes it's domestic, sometimes it's walls.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. One thing, how often is it that condos operate with a surplus? Is that common? Or like, I mean, if I'm on the board or if I'm in a condo, like to get a condo to be in surplus position historically, like what would it take to get there? And as a condo or potential purchaser of that unit, what does that signal to me?
I mean, in my opinion, every condo should have an operating surplus. Because how do you budget? Like, let's say I'm doing the budget for this year, and last year was a mild winter, let's say.
Yeah.
And so we didn't use that much gas. And now this year, I think, maybe we'll use 10% more than we did last year. And here's the new rate. So here's what I think it's going to be. But then we have a super cold winter, and that's super long. You need to have some money available to cover that difference without having to special assess the owners in the middle of the year, right? So you always want to kind of keep, I think they say 1 to 3 months of operating fees is what I've heard the auditors recommend in of an operating surplus so that you can manage those buffers. There's some surprise expense comes up, something you forgot to budget, something that was unplanned. You need to have some extra money. You can't just run with no spare capacity. And then if one year you erode it, then you build it back up another year. Or if you have a mild winter and you build up a little bit, then keep it. Don't just take it out of next year's budget. Like get that buffer built up is a much better place for a condo to be. Now, obviously not a ridiculous amount. We're not saying create a
Yeah.
big savings account, right? But yeah.
So one thing I've always wondered is, and this is a question I get from clients all the time or comments people make, I don't want to buy a condo because of the maintenance fees. And which is fine. At surface level, I understand at face value, like I get what you're saying, but what you're really saying, or I think the way that should be interpreted is in a condo, you cannot defer expenses, like relatively speaking. In a house, you can. If
Hmm.
my roof is past gone or my windows, I can just not do anything, just pass it on to the new person and whatever. In a condo, you can't do that. You have to stay on top of things, relatively speaking. The other benefit, aside from deferring costs, condo versus freehold, is that procurement of services, somebody fixing my house, I feel is probably going to be cheaper. So because you're probably working, you can get a handyman, whatever, like relatively speaking, like you're not looking at a unionized or a big shop, multiple vans, like some big operation for example, cleaning my windows. To clean the windows on a house, you're looking at $150, okay? For let's say, I don't know, 10, 15 windows or however many, right? It's not happening like that on a condo, but obviously for a number of other reasons, they probably have completely different insurance policies, like equipment, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
procurement of services for condos, how competitive is pricing? Because I figure how many vendors I don't know. I'm asking truly as a
Yeah.
layman. How many vendors are there? Is it competitive? Are there areas that they're not competitive? Like how does that even work?
So there are a lot of contractors that work on condos. Um, so you can definitely get competitive pricing. The one thing that I would warn any condo though is to manage their reputation, right? So condos have a bit of a reputation for being a difficult client to work with, right? Because
Okay.
it takes them a long time to make decisions, and quite often when the guys are working, they'll have a unit owner come out and start giving them instructions, or one of the directors come out and give them instructions, and they're not really sure who they're supposed to be listening to because who really is the boss, right? So it gets a bit messy in that regard. And so there are contractors who will probably charge a supplement to work on condo, but then I mean there probably should be a supplement because it's more difficult, right? Like it's not as straightforward as dealing with, say, a rental owner that owns 50 buildings and gets the process. Each repair at a condo is a brand new adventure for a new board that hasn't dealt with things. But if they manage their reputation well, in other words, if they behave appropriately, they use the professionals, they make sure that the communication is going through the appropriate channels. They're not giving side directions to the contractor and muddying the water, that they're just being professional in their interactions. Then they will build a loyal stable of contractors who give them good pricing because they'll have that good reputation. The flip side is build a bad reputation at your peril
Mm.
because it will spread through the industry that you're difficult to deal with, right? And then you're going to pay more. I think that kind of applies to every service to them, though, right? Not just restoration, like the
Right.
building restoration. Yeah. But they're not the easiest clients to work with. Like even for an engineering perspective, imagine I'm working for a rental owner and they want to meet with me. It's 3 in the afternoon. I'm working with a condo and they want to meet with me. It's 8 at night, right? So it's like it's a different game, right? And if I'm talking to a rental guy, I tell him, your balconies have 20% slab edge lamination we need to fix. He says, "Yep." I go to a condo, I say your balconies have 20% slab edge delamination, and they say, "What's a slab edge?" Right? You have to start at the beginning every time. And I actually enjoy that part of the process because I think, this huge responsibility has been put on the shoulders of these volunteers. And my job is to help them feel comfortable with the decisions that they're making. But is it easy? Sometimes no, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because I have a couple of friends that they're contractors to condos. A lot of guys in HVAC I know, like
yeah.
Trinity Energy, Aircon, all these guys, and I just hear the different stories from them, and then the bidding process and the competitiveness. So I've always wondered from the procurement side, like how do because these are these are not simple quotes, right?
No.
A lot of times it's complicated equipment, and you're quoting like a $650,000 job. Like there's a lot of line items, and like comparing them and having a standard template to understand all this stuff. I always thought it was a little like it was fascinating because it's complex, and I don't really know how they do it, but I always wondered if it's actually efficient. Like are the quotes coming in, call it
Apples
in
to
the
apples.
ballpark?
Do you know what? The other side, I was going to say, I'm thinking about it from a kind of engineering perspective, like the kinds of projects that engineers are involved in, like repairing your building, replacing your roof, doing
Yeah,
your caulking, those things we generally speaking control the tender process, right? So we have the bidders list and there's a specification. It's very apples to apples. When you get into some of the things you're talking about, like the service contracts, not every condo or every management firm managing a condo can write a proper scope of work.
that's right. It's right,
Right.
exactly.
And so then you get what you end up having is what they tend to do is they'll ask the incumbent, give us a price to do our maintenance and write up the scope of work. And then they'll kind of black it all out and send that scope of work to the next two guys and get
Yeah.
pricing, right? As a scope of
Okay.
work. But if that scope of work is wrong, then you have a problem. So an example, a lot of the new buildings have a judo filter. So they have a big filter that sits right inside where the domestic water comes in and filters the water before the building to get out any debris that's in the municipal water. And um, or they'll have pressure reducing valves. There's booster pumps and the different zones of water distribution. So there's pressure reducing valves. And a lot of times those are completely missed from the contracts, right? So you go in and a
Mm,
building's 6 or 7 years old and the insulation on these pieces of equipment is still has never been removed. So they've clearly never been maintained. And
wow.
so whose fault is that? Is it the contractor who should have known those existed and should have put them in scope? Or is it the person who hired the contractor who should have put them in scope? But meanwhile, the person who hired them is a volunteer board and the condo manager. They should have hired somebody to write the scope.
I
But
see.
the original scope was put in place by the builder and he didn't specify, and then they kept going on that basis. So it's like the origin of the mistake is not clear, but there are many buildings that are just completely missing equipment from their maintenance schedule. Strainers not getting open, PRVs not getting maintained, filters not being even running, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
that stuff I don't know how to fix that. Like it's how do you help them write a good scope of work? I mean the
I
mechanical
guess
guys
this is
can
where you
do
get
it.
involved, maybe.
Like,
It's
well, more on the mechanical side, that would be the mechanical engineers, but
yeah,
people are probably reluctant to spend the money on that scope of work, I'm guessing, but they're
right.
probably wise to, especially if a building has a BAS. I even have one building sitting about 8 years old, and they have a BAS, a building automation system that's controlling everything, the heating, the makeup air, everything, the domestic water. And I said to them, what's the login to get into the BAS so I can see the settings? And they're like, oh, we don't have it. The builder didn't give it to us. And I'm like, the building's
Oh,
8 years
wow.
old. Like, who's running the building? Nobody, just the system.
That is funny. Wow,
Yeah,
that's incredible. But that's
yeah,
a
yeah.
testament to how good the system's been running for 8 years.
Oh,
I
no,
mean,
it isn't. See, what happens
no?
is the service contractor, then when something is not working right, he can get into the BAS. So instead, he's taking a giant valve and adjusting it by a quarter turn to see
Oh,
if that
wow.
sorts the problem out or something. They're jury rigging them instead of, so then you get super complex. Right now, what's not working when something doesn't
Yeah.
work?
And
Yeah.
you don't have the context of who did what. Like Joe 2 years ago did that,
Did
Bob did
that.
that. Oh, that's good.
Exactly.
That's a
Yeah.
good
So they
time.
get pretty messy.
That's a good time right there.
Yeah, and if you
Wow.
look at a big commercial building, they're gonna have full-time guys on staff who know the systems inside and out and can like they're mechanical whisperers, right? Like they know what the
Yeah.
system needs. And when the weather's like this outside, we drop the temperature of the chiller down by 2 degrees so we don't get too much condensation or whatever, versus when you have a service contractor that's coming in once or twice a month, they can't tune a building like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
challenging for sure.
I'm wondering, so just on a more simple side,
Yeah.
when you are reviewing a building, I guess I don't know if this would show up in the status certificate, but kind of like, do you have like maybe just three red flags when you walk, like three common glaring red flags when you walk into a building? It's like, oh boy, this building is in trouble. Maybe it's attitude. Maybe it's like, for example, right now I currently have an offer on a condo where it's a 2022 build. Client loves it. I'm kind of on the fence on it, but they literally just fired the prior property manager. A new one started. I called them asking like, can you give me some feedback on the building? Like why were you like why was the other one gone? And they're like, and they're scared. They don't want to talk. So they only respond in email and they're just giving me like legalese answers. So it's making me very uncomfortable because I can't like actually get a read on this building. And then in the past, when somebody has fired a property management company, generally it's because of something bad. So from your point of view, kind of like three red flags you typically see with buildings from your end that would be beneficial for buyers to know about upfront.
I mean, I see buildings through my eyes, right? Which is a reserve fund planner's eyes. And so
Yep.
for me, it's always about the money. And because if the money's right, most other things work okay. You know what I
It
mean?
truly is. It always is. That's first principles. Yeah, first
Yeah,
principles engineering right there. It's always the money.
it's always the money. And so for me, it's always about the financial situation. I mean, obviously, I don't want to see a building that is, structurally compromised or anything like that, but that's not common. So
Right.
it's more about the money. And so when it's 2 years old, I don't see a manager change at 2 years old as a red flag because a lot of times the first manager is put in by the builder. And so they, the boards, the owners kind of think, yeah, we don't really know whose team you're playing on at some point.
I
Some
see.
are fine, like some make it somehow manage to navigate that and stay in place, but some change. So it doesn't bother me that much, other than the havoc that it creates, right?
I
That
see.
it's depending on the timing of it, does it impact the quality of the performance audit? Does it impact the quality of, there's a lot of things that happen at the end of, at the end of the first year, like review of contracts and going back to the builder about the first year, any first year budget overrun, those sorts of things that need to get done. And if a manager change happens right around then are likely to get missed. Um, and the continuity on the performance audit resolution. So when we're doing that warranty review and then following up with the builder, that's hard when there's a manager change because you lose a lot of documentation. And what always happens as soon as that manager is changed, then every single thing we ask the builder for, he says, I gave it to the previous manager,
Of course. Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
on them. They lost it. It's not that we didn't provide it. So that gets super frustrating. But if I looked on, so for me, it's about if I'm a 2022 building, depending on their first year reserve fund study, the quality of that study, they're probably facing a 300% increase in reserve contributions over the next 5 or 6 years. So that can be very significant fee increases, but
Yeah.
that should be revealed on your notice of future funding at the back of the status
Yeah,
certificates.
you're seeing it
We'll look at that.
39% year over year,
Yeah, yeah.
for the next 3 years or whatever.
If you usually you'll see it for six on that young one, and then
The,
and if you're not seeing that, then they're probably not planning far enough. Like they're it's going to come at some point. But
yeah, they already have been around for 3 years, and the next 3 years have the 39%
yeah,
increase.
okay, so that may be their six. Yeah,
Yeah.
that may be okay. Yeah, yeah. So it's that, and then really it's what else do I look for? It's about the money. It's about
And I
I mean
guess I'm just
the cost sharing is always my big thing. Like I just think these buildings with the crazy cost sharing is just not worth the aggravation. Like I
right.
don't know how we're gonna, I mean, they can muddle through for a while, but if they don't have it really well tied down, it's gonna just be a war zone. And I hate
Right.
that.
Then yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's ultimately it to me it feels like it's like, you win the battle, you lose the war because it's like it's how important like cost sharing is important, but in the grand scheme of things, is it? Like for the complexity it introduces, it's probably not, like you said.
Yeah, well, I mean, the city wants these buildings to be like this. They want multi-uses, they want retail on the bottom, they want all of this going on, and it's nice, but it shouldn't be condos. This is too much for a volunteer board.
Yeah.
So they come to places where, we've got some sites where they're fighting so much on the shared front that there's actually court-appointed administration in to take care of the shared facilities because they can't decide amongst themselves. And they get
Wow.
silly processes, right? Imagine you can have a shared agreement where there's a shared committee with four members, one for each corporation, let's say, and all votes have to be unanimous. Okay, but one
Wow.
party doesn't use the elevator that's shared, and so he's never going to vote to spend money on it. And so
Yeah.
you end up in these stalemates, right? Where they just can't, they're just dumb. And then nobody knows who's supposed to do the work. And then a lot of times that from an accounting perspective, it seems to be extraordinarily difficult for the management firms to manage the cost allocations so that we know that the right people have paid the right amount of the right costs. And so they can
Right.
get themselves into a real muddle on that front. And because it's extraordinarily complex, like it's not unexpected, but it's disappointing because they've been around, cost sharing agreements have been around for a lot of years. They used to be simple, but in the last, say, 10 years, they've gotten very complex, and I feel like we haven't kept up to them. And so there's some buildings where they quite frankly don't know who owes who what, at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Conversely, are there any underrated, I guess, positive signs to a well-managed building that maybe doesn't get as much attention from your end?
You know what you I always say a building has a vibe, right? And not maybe not so much when they're new. I find some of these big new ones so impersonal that I have a hard time getting a read on them. In the older buildings, you could kind of walk, by the time you spent 3 or 4 hours walking around a condo, kind of had the vibe of the place. What's the
Yeah.
manager's attitude? What's the security's attitude? Are they greeting people by name and friendly and helpful? Or is everybody guarded? Everybody's
Yeah.
careful about what they say and who they're talking to, and the people are anxious and everybody like I just feel like you want it to be a community. You want it to be a place that you want to go home to. And
Yeah.
so to me, that's probably half the battle won. Do they do any social events where the owners participate? Are there committees? Are there clubs and groups? Like, and that's not everybody's cup of tea. And I'm not saying everybody has to participate in those, but their presence indicates that something is going well
Yeah,
in
it's
the
vibing.
community.
It's like the kids these days. It's the vibe is good, right? So I
Yeah,
think
exactly. Yeah.
translate it to a status certificate. When I hear stuff like that, I'm always thinking again, building with high end user ratio to tenants. Generally where you get that, but it also has to be up until a certain amount of units. So for example, I think once you go into a condo over 300 units, like substantially more. At 300, you're already pushing it. But I've
Mhm.
been to units, to condos. I've owned in condos where it's 300 units, great vibe, mostly, 65%, end user owned in downtown, which I think that's a pretty good
That's
number.
pretty
Like
high.
in the
Yeah.
suburbs, it's easy. You can do 80%, no problem. But downtown, different ball game. But even downtown, yeah. So it has to be quote unquote boutique and a lot of end users, and I think you get that vibe for the most part. Obviously, it's not a foolproof system, but I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Are there many buildings like that though? Like I have to feel like
No,
because we're buying so many units that it's
I
mostly
mean,
rentals.
anything that's built now is nothing like that. Now what you're getting is 500 units, all glass, 80%, 70% rentals. I mean, it's that stuff's gone. Like that, again, if you want that, you got to look something that's 10 years older or older and in
It's
specific
interesting.
areas. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't seen. There used to be, there's a few along church that were built in the last 10 years that even to this day, I have clients that they're like, you know what, I'm gonna miss this place. Like we used to get
Huh.
out in front of the park, like 30 of us, and we would just do this or that. And it's like, but over time it fades away. Maybe it will change. Like this is back in like, they were bought in like 2010, 2015. You still had investors, but it was a mix. And
It
now,
is.
now it's like I don't know. I mean, I don't know that many end users that are buying anything that's closing now. It's mostly like investors or people that were trying to flip the assignment or whatever and now are
Yeah.
declaring bankruptcy. So speaking of that, my last question for you, and you're not an expert on this, but I do like to get the temperature in the room from the normal person out in the street. So yesterday I spoke with a lawyer, a real estate lawyer, and I asked him like how does he feel about the market? So now I'm gonna ask you, you don't know. You don't know. You're just living your life doing these audits and stuff and working in engineering. But I do wonder from your perspective, I'm very interested to see how do you feel about the market just in general? Because it's been 3 months. Last we spoke, it was tough. This and that, prices are high. Since then, prices have been coming down. Affordability has been improving, but we've hit record lows in terms of like market performance. So we have had the least amount of sales in like 20 to 25 years. So we're constantly selling at 60% of what we usually do. I can safely say most of this was caused with administration in the US. It started around January. Tariff talk, people got scared about their jobs, all that stuff. Now that stuff's kind of subsided. People don't care as much. Nobody's listening as much.
Yeah.
It's not on the news as much. So things from my end, they're kind of like, okay, they're calm. But I just want to know from your perspective, how do you feel? Just what's your take on it from the little that you follow? I assume you don't follow the market
I
closely.
watch it a little bit because I do get put into the position. Let's say I do a performance audit now. A few weeks ago, I was in the room with a unit owners meeting. So all the unit owners in the room. And it's a sad situation. They're just comfortable saying, well, everybody in the room has already lost money on this purchase. And so, we're going to try and make the best of this bad lot. And so to be in a room where every owner in a building is saying, well, I already lost a lot of money on this thing. How do we, get it to the finish line is pretty sad, right? You got to, like, my heart goes out to them. So I do pay attention. I think for me, I'm always looking at the bigger context because the reason I look at it is to say where are we going, right? Like and not from a purchase price perspective, like how is it going to impact long-term planning? And if I look at it and I say, like if you do a graph of mortgage rates for the last 40 years, let's say, you're going to see that they bumped around, in the 70s, 23%, but it was 8, it was 9, it was 5, it was 5 to 9. 2008 hits, bam, down to 2 and 3%, right? And so that 2 and 3% from 2008, which was when we invented this damn quantitative easing, right? Which I translate quantitative easing means let's make money really cheap to borrow. In other words, we're going to reward guys who want to borrow money, want to punish anybody who saves.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I don't think is good for society. Like it may be great if you're early in on the investor side, but it's not great. But if you look at it and that, those rates came down and from there, right, from 2008 up until COVID, basically, prices are screaming up, right? So it's to me, it's like any other bubble. It's a fake, like the government created a fake situation where money was so cheap that people got to be able to borrow more. And if they can borrow more, the builders will take it from them, right? So
Yeah.
whatever you can afford, I will charge you. And and so that to me has been the influence, right? And so then we hit COVID, and then, then everything's haywire, right? The government's handing out billions of dollars, and we know that's going to be inflationary, so costs are up. They want to keep interest. Now interest got to go up because we got to manage that mess of inflation. Like it's just so much government interference that I feel like we have no idea where the market is, except that my belief is the run up from 2008 to 2020 was the fake bit. That was the bubble formation. And so I actually think that we do need, I think if we come down to 30 or 35% like we did in 1990, which was the last big bubble, right? then I feel like we're probably getting back to a sensible place. Now, and I think that's great for the young people, right? Because it starts to make home ownership possible again. And
Yep.
I think that's important. Like, I don't, how
Which
do
we
you
need
start
that.
a
Yep.
life if you can't have a home, right? So I think that's important. Some people are going to suffer, of course, right? Like when, in I'm old enough to remember 1999 .com, everything went through the ceiling and then it fell down and some people got hurt and that's the way it is, right? And so that's what we got to face still. And I mean, people are facing, and you see that much more than me, I'm sure. Like I sit in this room full of people where they say everybody's lost money. You're probably dealing with the individuals, like
Yeah,
who are
it's like
sitting
I
on a
mean the
unit.
lawyer Mark Morris, who I spoke with yesterday, he's very well known in the city of Toronto. He does a lot of new construction closings, and I did a 6 month update with him, and he will talk to people. He'll have clients every single day come up, two, three, four, five. Hey, I have all these units, I can't close on them. I speculated. Some of them won't admit it. They're like, but a lot of them bought it with the intention to speculate because real estate only goes up, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark said, like, he basically said, the earth is healing because,
Mm-hmm.
prices continue to slide down. People will have to declare bankruptcies. They are getting sued by like we'll have
Mm-hmm.
Center Court, which is a big builder here. They will
Yeah.
sue anyone and everyone, and they're setting the precedent. It's like you signed the contract, you're now gonna pay for it, and if you can't pay for it, you're gonna pay the price for doing this in a so like in
Yeah,
a
I
call
think
it
people have this mistaken belief that they can walk away, and in Canada we can't walk away.
no.
In 2008, the Americans will walk away, but we can't
Yeah.
walk away with our non-recourse lending. So, yeah, you're going to pay for that. You're going to fulfill that contract, or you're going to suffer the pain, and it stinks for those people. It's awful. The guys last to the party. It's always awful. But I do think from a societal perspective, it's a net positive. We need
a
to get
hundred percent.
housing back down to something realistic that people can achieve. So I think it's a net good. Is it gonna, I don't know how much longer it's gonna take till it works itself out. I think in the 90s it was probably, I don't know, 5, 6 years before we started to turn back.
Yep.
So I suspect we have a ways to go if that's any predictor of the future.
Yeah, yeah,
Not to
that's
say it
exactly.
is.
So the city of Toronto, typically after every crash, I've kind of modeled out the data, and it's usually the core Toronto GTA recovers within, I think it was 5 to 7 years, and the outskirts take about 10 years to kind
Really
of
that
get
long,
back
eh?
to their, yeah. So
Yeah.
the outskirts are always, because like for example, the Hamiltons, all like Lindsay, Ontario, Peterborough, all these places popped off during COVID. Now it's like everybody's like, oh my God, I went and bought a 10-plex there. And now I'm having problems with rents. Why did I buy one here? Well, I don't know. Like you tell me. But
Yeah.
everybody was chasing doors. I want to have 17 doors. I want to have 27 doors. Okay, you
Oh,
got the
interesting.
doors,
Yeah.
but if people that have no employment, right, where it's much more difficult,
Yeah.
downtown, you're getting stellar tenants here because the jobs are all here. But anyway, I don't want to go on a tangent. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think the earth is healing, and I think it is good to get affordability. If you look at affordability now, with mortgage rates being in the high threes for like first time home buyers, and where prices are, it's pretty much one of the more affordable times we have seen in a long time. And even now, like for investment properties, you're starting to see properties in the city of Toronto that are cash flowing. Cash
Oh,
flowing
interesting.
properties were not a thing. Like this was never a thing. Like even I've bought properties in the city of Toronto that produced 19% internal rate of return. So the return on my money was like, 15 to 20%. But I was cash outflowing them, meaning I would buy a condo, I would rent it out for 2,500
Interesting.
bucks, but my total cost was 2,800 bucks. So I was outflowing 300, but because my rate was 1.8%, I was paying down so much principal that it was still returning me roughly 15 to 18% per year on my 20% I put down. And I was doing those all day long and it worked. But then I started seeing the writing on the wall and I'm like, okay, that's it. Enough. But now you can actually get cash flow neutral properties. You can get condos. Like I've seen one bedrooms with parking go for like low 400s
Wow.
and you
Yeah.
can rent them for like 2,500 bucks. But now there's also price pressure on rents because rents are
Rents
coming
too.
down.
Yeah. Which
So
is good
everything,
too.
yeah,
People are so stuck financially. So
absolutely. You got to get
yeah.
people out of their parents' basements. You got to get people like being independent. So I think it's great. A lot of uncertainty, like in terms of if you want to invest and stuff, like is this the bottom? Is it not? I don't know. I think we're probably scraping the bottom, but it could be that means we could have another couple of years of flat real estate prices,
Yeah.
right? So
But
you just
even,
never know.
I've always said when I bought my house, I can remember thinking, oh my gosh, it's too high. I'm paying too much. I'm paying too much. But the reality is that you live in it for 10 years. And even if you sell it for the same as what you bought it for, you're like, you lived in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
client right now. She has a medical practice. We're looking and we're doing this exact same math. So she's like, I'm gonna close down in 10 years. What's the benefit of me owning versus leasing? Because she has to move right now because she was leasing, somebody bought the building, you got to get out. And we did the math, and it's for her, based on the current rents for medical office space versus her buying a purpose-built place that we found, the delta on the back end of that is about 650,000
Hmm.
positive. And that's assuming like normal market, like, 3.5 to 4% appreciation per year. We're used to like eight. So
Hmm.
I don't think we're going to see that. But let's say 4%, let's say worst case scenario, 2.5% to match inflation. You're still ahead by like, just under $500,000, even in the
Hmm.
worst case scenario. So when
Interesting.
it starts to get to this point, it's starting to like, I think investors are going to come back because I'm looking at it also from the investor point of view, like for myself, for other clients. Not that appetite is big for investing, but to me right now, I'm looking at places and it's like, it's incredible because there's no competition. You can bully the seller. Sometimes, I've made the mistake of negotiating too aggressively and losing.
Losing
So
it.
you gotta, because the world hasn't fallen apart. Like people are not gonna give it away for free, right? So you
Yeah.
gotta be careful with that. But there's definitely some deals to be had, at least from where I sit.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's going to ease things up. What I hope we don't, I know there's pressure on the government to reduce interest rates, but I always draw people back to that historical graph that says, you know what, 5 to 8 is normal.
Yeah.
2 to 3 is not normal. And so as long as money is cheap, we're going to have bubbles. And so we got it's a huge balancing act that people don't like that. They don't want to pay 5% interest, but it keeps things in check
Yeah.
a little bit
Yeah.
better, I
Yeah.
suspect.
And we just, I think historically, from the G7 countries, we cut rates faster and more than anybody else in the G7. So I don't know if we should be cutting more. I mean, who knows,
Well, if
right?
you look
But
at Canada, Canadians are kind of smug about 2008. The American bullet because, Mr. Carney's so smart or something. That's like, don't be so sure about that. That we just picked the 20-year long bullet.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like we're still paying the price for the decisions that were made by the government back in 2008. And
yeah,
on the reserve front, I mean, it impacts us. Like it impacts you guys on this investment side and the purchase side, but on the reserve side, it impacts us hugely because before 2008, your GICs were always running 2 to 3% ahead of inflation. So
oh,
if you had $1 million sitting in reserve, it was earning interest. Now, since 2008, your inflation and your GICs are right on top of each other. And so you put $1 million in the bank and leave it, and next year you still have $1 million. Like it didn't, it hasn't gone up at all because inflation and interest are the same. And so from a reserve perspective, it's a huge penalty. That's why I always say we're penalizing the savers, and condos are huge savers,
they have to be, yeah,
right? And so, here we force them to save, and then we've created an environment where there's no benefit to saving.
yeah. Wait
And
until
that
they start
stinks.
buying into cryptocurrencies instead of
No,
GICs.
I can't do that.
Imagine that.
We had
I
one,
think that
I think there
didn't
was one
somebody
who did
try?
it.
I think somebody tried doing that. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah.
Anyway, that's wild. And I could have sworn, I don't know if they put it in a cryptocurrency ETF or something,
It
but I
wasn't a
thought to
good one
myself,
either because they lost
yeah,
money, I think.
yeah, I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be interesting. Well, thank you so much for your time as always. This was, as always, super educational, and
My pleasure.
and that's it. Let's see how we do this time around.